Okay, first of all, in Cinema 4D, we want to make sure we have a proper Octane render setting. So I'm going to drag my Octane render settings over here. Let's make sure we are on the same page. Just going to use one of my presets, which has max samples to 500, diffuse depths to 4, specular depth 4, scatter depth 8, and GI clamp to 1000. Let me drag this window to another monitor for a second. So I think we are good to start. Let's head to File and Merge Project. And let's import our Hoodie 01 static OBJ file that we've exported. Let's make sure we have texture chords UVs enabled and splitting by object. Press OK. Now we have our Hoodie is imported to the Cinema 4D. We have a live preview in Octane straight away. I want to make sure I center access to the center of the object so we can drag and move the position more conveniently. So just going to position it in the center of the scene like this. And for now, I'm going to turn off or even pause the render so to have a more smooth workflow in the viewer port. Let's head to render settings and select render to Octane render and enable the render passes. So I think we're good and all set up. Now let's rename our OBJ, static OBJ to Hoodie static, like this. And now, first thing first, let's create a cloth surface to add some thickness. And also I'm going to rename this cloth object to make our scene more tidy and clean in terms of naming and stuff. And also I'm going to make the OBJ file as a child of the cloth object. We don't really see any changes for now because we have to do some tweaks inside the Hoodie cloth object here. First of all, let's decrease the subdivision to 0 because our model is pretty high poly. We don't really need to overload the scene. And let's make the thickness to, let's say, 2 centimeters to add some thickness to it. And if we zoom in closer to this wrist part, we see this 2 centimeter thickness that we've created. By increasing and decreasing, you see it's dramatically changing the overall look. So let's make it 2 centimeters for now. And another important thing, we have to delete this normal tag that Cinema 4D created for us. And by deleting it, you clearly see that we now have a feeling of those gaps between the sleeve and body part, which is pretty important for the outfits. And Marvelous Designer creates this weird 22.5 Phong angle for most of the outfits you export. We don't really need that. We have to change this number to 90. And now we can clearly see those nice and smooth connections between sleeve parts and body parts. Like by decreasing the Phong angle, you see we clearly don't want this to be lower than 90, obviously. In some cases, you want to set as 180. But in this case, we're going to set Phong angle to 90 for more accurate results. And now we will zoom in and see all the sewing parts are there. We now clearly see them. And I'm going to turn on the Octane render to see how it looks with some basic flat light. I'm just going to head to render settings real quick and set up our scene resolution to something more squarish like this. Let's re-render the frame. Okay, and now I'm going to press this lock resolution button so we can see this actual square inside our live viewer. It will give us much more room and space in our environment when we'll be setting up our camera later on. Now we're going to do some shader work inside Octane. So I'm going to open this folder that we exported our texture in, and I'm gonna drag this Octane node editor from my another monitor so you can see what's happening over here. To get access to this window, you can go to Materials and click Octane Node Editor, and it will pop up this window. I highly recommend using this thing because it's very convenient to work with the shaders and textures. You can see the whole picture straight away. Now let's create our first shader. First of all, let's delete those 4 materials that Cinema 4D created for us when we imported the mesh. Let's delete those, and I think we have to create a new one. Let's drag this Octane material to our node space over here, and let's rename it body. Okay, cool. And I'm going to select my folder that we exported textures and drag all 5 textures directly into the node editor. It will create those 5 image textures for us, and we have to start connecting them for a proper channels. So first of all, I'm going to select the material, select the basic panel over here, and material type, I'm going to select universal. And now I'm going to select this one. This is obviously a color map, and I'm going to connect it with albedo. This one is height. We won't be using it for now. This one is obviously normal map. This one is roughness, connected with the roughness, and this one is metallic, connected with metallic, like this. Let's align those guys a little bit, and let's double click them so they won't take that much space, like this. Okay, cool. And now we want to drag and drop this new shader that we've created on top of our body part. So as you can see, our hood static mesh has 2 different polygon selections. We just have to make sure we are dragging it on a proper one. So after double clicking on this selection tool, I see that this is the right one. So I'm going to drag and drop and replace the old one. We're pretty much done with some basic material creation for this body part. Now let's create a new material for the sleeve parts. So let's head back to our Octane node editor, drag a new Octane material. Let's place it like this, and let's call it sleeves. I'm going to do the same thing I did in previous body material. So I'm going to select the material type as universal, drag and drop all the 5 maps to the Octane node editor, and do those channel connections between nodes, image textures. So roughness to roughness, normal to normal, metallic to metallic, color to color, and like this. And let's do the same thing. Let's select this sleeve material and replace it with an old one. So now we have both materials set up in our scene, some basic fabric material. And now, once we are done with that, I'm going to create a few lighting sources to the scene to make it more realistic. So we're gonna start with adding a texture environment over here. Let's add it. And this one is something like a background, so it fills the background of our Octane render engine. Let's set the color to black. So as you can see, for now it's totally black and there is nothing happening over here. That's because we don't have any other sources. So now let's add HDRI environment to the scene. And in this HDRI object, we want to select this texture layer over here, and let's select the good looking HDRI studio and place it to the scene. So now we have our basic HDRI is lighting our scene. There are so many different parameters we can work with. The main are in the environment tag, the HDRI tag, which is a rotation by X and Y. So you can rotate it directly in your scene and find a perfect position. And now our HDRI is actually filling the background. We don't really want that. We want it to be black. So let's go back to our BG layer, and in the type mode, let's select the visible environment. So now it should work. Let's do a playback just a little bit to reset the engine. Okay, now we have the black color is filling our scene with the HDRI is lightening the scene. So this is a really cool trick if you're not familiar with that. So let's call it HDRI main HDRI. So we are all set. Now we can actually position our light. We need to, let's say I want this light to be hitting our fabric, our hoodie from top right. So I'm going to leave it at this position, at this rotation X value right here. And now we're going to use a 3-point light system technique over here. So we're going to add a few more light sources to the scene to make some contrast. So let's go to Object Light and let's select the targeted light. And now it's targeting our hoodie. We want to make sure that in this target expression, target tab, it's targeting actually the hoodie static mesh rather than cloth, because it's gonna shoot and aim into the axis. So let's drag and drop and replace that. And now we're good to rotate and place the light. So this one is going to be our rear backlight. I'm going to place it something like this. And in these light parameters, I'm going to turn off the camera visibility and shadow visibility. So our camera actually won't see it. And I'm going to rename it backlight. And in the light parameters, I'm going to decrease, and actually I'm going to start with adding the color to it. So I'm going to, in the texture, I'm going to select the RGB octane node over here. Let's double click on it. I'm going to select something more reddish, I guess. So now we see we have this nice and clean looking red color is bouncing on the back of our hoodie. Let's increase the size and play a little bit with the power. Let's decrease it to something maybe 50. I'm gonna check if it's not overexposing our image, our back part. So looking good. So now we're gonna tweak that parameter maybe later on. Now I'm going to create another targeted light, just copying it. And I'm gonna name it right light. Just dragging it to the front part and a little bit to the right of the screen. And this one is going to be our contrast color. So I'm going to choose the color to something more bluish, something like that. So it has a pretty interesting contrast. Now I'm going to decrease the power so it won't be overexposing our front part. So this is the flat one with the HDRI, the first light source we are using. Then we're gonna add the back and the front. So now it looks much more appealing and much more interesting for us. Once I'm done with the basic lighting set, I'm gonna create a new object called camera. Let's rename it main cam. And let's select this so we can view as a camera in our viewport. So I'm going to increase a focal length of the camera so it will be much more zoomed in and fit our square type of the image. So in the camera settings, I'm going to go to thin lens, and in the depth of field, I want to make sure it is enabled. And in aperture, we want some higher values. Also, let's select this big focus tool and click it on the chest bar, so it will be focusing this chest bar rather than the sleeve part. And in this aperture, let's hit something more higher, like 25, and you see we have nice depth of field, but for the presentation wise, you want to stick to the lower values for, let's say, 10 centimeters, like this, okay? And I'm pretty much happy with the basic stuff that we've built in terms of light and camera. So now I'm going to select this basic mesh and rotate it something more like 100 degrees to see those back parts of the hoodie, which are pretty looking great and dramatic. This is the power of light. I mean, we've added only a simple HDRI and two different targeted light sources, and it already tells a story, exactly what we needed. So now we are heading back to our shader, and we'll be adding some extra details to our fabrics to give it more interesting and unique look. We'll be adding some depth to it. So I want to drag this float texture over here. This is basically a slider between black and white values. So I'm going to attach this float texture to specular channel. So, and I want to decrease this just a little bit down, something around 0.2. So because the fabric materials aren't reflective, they're not really reflecting any light sources, they are absorbing it. So let's have a comparison. Let's go to compare and store image, and let's detach it. So in the A section in the left side, you see without the specular changes, and in the right side you see with the lower down specular channel. So it's definitely better to stick to lower values of the specular to make the fabric pretty much diffuse all the light sources you have. Now we're gonna head back to our node and attach the floating texture back. I really like how this light is bouncing on our sleeve part, so we don't really going to tweak the sleeve roughness or sleeve specular channel, but instead we're going to do some coating changes inside there. So let's go to sleeve material and go to coating layer. Let's increase the coating just a little bit, and you'll see how it created an extra layer above our actual fabric. So it's this parameter is actually using a lot in car painting materials. So so this is pretty great stuff to add an extra stuff like plastic or I don't know on top of your parts to give them a nice and interesting and unique look. So I'm going to leave these parameters like this, and yeah, I really like how much depth we have on those sleeve parts. You know, we have our basic patterns, we have normal map, and on top of it we have the coating layer, which gives this nice and interesting look. For now, let's say I really want to change something in texture wise, so I don't really like those patterns that we've created. So I'm going back to our Substance Painter project. We're going to select this mask we did, and going to select this paper pattern, and just going to replace the pattern to something different, you know, just to you have a clear understanding how easy it is. So I just gonna choose this pattern and scale it just a little bit down like this, and yeah, I'm pretty much happy with the new one. So I'm going to export those directly. Let's go File, Export Textures. We don't really need to change any parameters, just deselect body because we've done changes on two sleeve parts, and press export. 1 second and it's done. Back to our Cinema 4D. We're gonna select all the image textures and press reload. And now within a few seconds, we have our new pattern uploaded to the scene on our sleeve parts. And this is very awesome workflow. And I think we're done with the static version of this hoodie. It turned pretty much great. We won't be doing any changes in terms of texture or light. We'll be adding our animated version. So let's start with deselecting or hiding this static one, and let's go to File, Merge Project. Let's import the Alembic file we've exported. Let's double click it. Let's make sure we're working in the proper frame rate, 25. We want to make sure we are importing normals and UVs and press OK. And now I'm going to position it into the center of our scene, same as we did with the static version. Just some minor positioning tweaks. Actually, I'm going to replace it, place it on the same place with the static one, like this. Okay. So I'm going to copy this cloth object from the static one, delete the mesh, and make this Alembic file. First of all, let's rename it hoodie animated ABC, meaning Alembic. This one is going to be hoodie cloth animated. Okay, let's enable it and make Alembic file as a child of this cloth. So we're pretty much done with the setup. Let's do the same thing we did with the static. So let's make sure the fong tag is at 90 degrees, like this. Okay, now we see all the stitching, sewing parts. And as you can see, our Alembic mesh doesn't have any polygon selections or materials. So we're going to use a little trick over here. We're going to select all the polygon selections and materials from the static one and copy, drag and drop on top of the Alembic version of it. So now we have the same polygons and materials overlaid on top of our animated version. Now I'm going to find the frame where the animation starts. As far as I remember, it's 24th. 24th, let's set it 24, like this. And let's play forward to see how our animation with the textures is looking neat and clean. Okay, now we're gonna make sure all the project settings and export settings are matching each other. So let me go to the project settings, render settings over here, and set the frame rate to 25. We're starting our animation from 24th frame, like this, yes, and we are gonna end on frame 90. So also we want to make sure in the project settings by clicking Ctrl D we select 25 FPS, so our timeline is represented in 25 frames as well. So now we want to make sure this animation is gonna last around 3 seconds. So yeah, let's make sure the end frame is gonna be 19th frame, like this. Okay, now let's play back a little bit. And the animation is pretty much even loopable, even though the cloth sim won't give us this possibility. But we're ready to do some basic 360 animation of this guy. So let's make sure we are selecting the cloth object rather than ABC file. And while at this first frame, let's select this set active keyframe, and let's go to the last frame and rotate it 360, like this. Press the keyframe again. Let's select both frames, right click and press linear, so the rotation would be much more loopable in all the ways possible. So let's play this guy a little bit and see how the 360 animation is working. looking great to me. I think we're gonna make some like rotation to see how the light intersects on this or on that position. So I'm gonna do another camera and call it cam animation, and going to zoom it out and place it so the actual hoodie is placed in the middle in all the rotation positions. Going to turn off the viewport visibility of all our objects so we can clearly see our hoodie without any other object. So I think I'm going to just placing it just in the middle like this. And I want to make sure I'm working in a proper camera response, so I'm going to camera imager, this tab, and let's enable it by clicking this checkbox over here. So we want to make sure we are working in sRGB response for proper color representation. So there are so many different loads over there. It already has a linear response, but we're gonna stick to sRGB one. Now, actually, I'm going to select the same parameters on our static camera. And by finalizing everything, I'm going to select both cameras and enable the post-processing. So post-processing adds some kind of a bloom and glare effects on top of your image. It is very common in nowadays in cyberpunk culture, in 3D art, so just don't go that too much with the values because it might ruin your image. So, and I'm pretty much sure we are done with everything, with animation, texturing, lighting, and keyframing the basic animation. And now we have to set up a proper export setting for our animation. Now let's go back to render settings and to output panel over here, making sure we are working in the right resolution, frame range, frame rate. We don't want this to be saved as a common Cinema 4D. We will be exporting as a multi-passes, Octane multi-passes. So making sure the pass is correct over here. Let's select the file format to PSD. We can actually select EXR, but we don't have that much information, so we don't really need EXR, so PSD is fine. Going to check post, so it would export post-processing information as a separate channel over here. And let's select Save Beauty as well. So it's going to be our main source. Image color palette sRGB and tone map type to tone mapped, like this. So just make sure everything is checked. Those are pretty much basic export settings we need. And yeah, I think we are pretty much good to hit the magic button and send this scene to render. So let's go. And here's our final result. I really hope that you've got something useful from this course. And I'm so excited to see what your next digital outfit is going to look like. Don't forget to experiment. And until next time, see ya.